Hi, I am Minakatan Solanki, Associate Professor, Sikya Anusandhan Team to B University. In this presentation, we will discuss about classical theory of interest. Why study of interest rate? Interest rate is among the most closely watched variables in the economy because the acts of saving and lending and borrowing and investing are significantly influenced by and tied together by the interest rate. It influences economic decisions of a person, whether to consume or save, whether to buy a house, and whether to purchase bonds or put funds into a savings account. It is also influences economic decisions of business, that is whether to use their funds to invest in new equipment or factories, and households, that is to save rather than to spend their money. It allocates available supply of credit to those investment projects with the highest expected returns. It also brings the supply of money into balance with the public's demand for money. Defining interest rate. Different economists define interest rate differently. The major definitions are presented in this presentation. According to Fisher, an interest rate is the price a borrower pays for the use of money they borrow from a lender. According to Marshall, interest is the price for postponing consumption. According to Mill, interest is the remuneration for mere abstinences. Keynes defined interest as the reward for parting with liquidity for a specified period. According to Seligman, interest is a return from the fund of capital. According to Wicksell, interest may be defined as a payment made by the borrower of capital by virtue of its productivity as a reward for its abstinence. All these definitions provides us information on the definition of interest. We can say interest is the rate of return on capital, interest is the price paid for borrowed funds, and interest is the cost to the borrower and return to the lender. Why interest is paid or charged? There are two views regarding why interest is paid or charged. First, from creditor point of view, and last, the debtor's point of view. From creditor's point of view, capital has productivity and it can generate income in production process. Out of the earned income, a part of the income is paid to the creditor, which is known as interest. Therefore, interest is a reward for use of capital. Interest is also a reward for risk. Lender exposes himself to risk when he lends money, and sometimes the loan becomes bad debts. Therefore, interest is paid as a reward for risk taking. Interest is also the reward for inconvenience. When a lender gives loan, he forgets his use for the duration of the loan, and if he needs this amount for his personal use, he will have to undergo inconvenience of arranging it from some other sources. From debtor's point of view, already we discussed, creditors of money demand interest because they have taken pains in saving money, they have suffered inconvenience in postponing their needs, and they have taken the risk of bad debts. If creditors will not get some reward for their lending, they may lose interest in saving money, which decreases capital formation in the market, and debtors will suffer. Therefore, debtors give interest to creditors to get some reward for lending their saving. What is the difference between gross and net investment? Interest paid by borrowers to the lenders is called gross interest or composite interest. The gross interest includes payment for loan of capital, payment of risk, both personal and business, payment for inconvenience, and cost of administrating credit. When payment of risk, payment for inconvenience, and cost of administrating credit are deducted from gross interest, net interest is arrived at. Therefore, net interest is the payment for the loan of capital only. What is the difference between nominal and real interest? Inflation in an economy influences the cost of borrowing. Interest rate which makes no allowance for inflation is referred to as the nominal interest rate. Real interest rate is adjusted to the change in the price level and more accurately reflects the true cost of borrowing. It is measured by subtracting expected changes in the price level from the nominal rate of interest. Therefore, real interest rate is equal to nominal interest rate minus rate of inflation. If the nominal rate of interest is 10% and prices rise by 5%, then the real rate of interest is 5%. Real interest rate may be ex ante real interest rate, where it is adjusted for expected changes in the price level, or it may be ex post real interest rate, where real interest rate is adjusted for actual changes in the price level. Different definitions given by different economists on interest center around the question why interest charged. Answer to this question led to development of different schools of thought on determination of equilibrium rate of interest. Basically, there are four theories on the determination rate of interest which we will discuss. First, classical theory of interest or the real theory of interest. Second, neoclassical theory of interest or the loanable funds theory of interest. Third, Keynes theory of liquidity preference. And fourth, modern theory of interest or neo-Keynesian theory of interest or Hicks-IS-LM curve approach. Now coming to classical theory of interest. Classical theory of interest is associated with the names of David Ricardo, Marshall, Pigou, Castles, Waters, and Knight. This theory is known as the real theory of interest because only real factors like productivity and thrift are considered in determination of the interest rate, and monetary factors are not given any importance. The classical theory is also called saving investment theory of interest or the demand and supply theory of interest because the classical theory argues that the rate of interest determined by two forces, the supply of capital, that is saving, derived mainly from households, and the demand for capital coming mainly from the business sector. What are the assumptions of the classical theory of interest? The classical theory of interest is based on the constant level of income corresponding to a constant level of employment. The classical theory assumes resources in the economy are fully employed. It also assumes there is perfect competition in the market so that lenders and borrowers are price takers and only one pure rate of interest prevails in the market. The theory uses partial equilibrium approach in which all factors other than the rate of interest that might influence the demand or supply of capital are assumed to be held constant. Already, the classical economists say two market forces, that is supply of capital and demand for invested capital, determines the equilibrium rate of interest. Coming to supply of capital. Supply of capital depends basically on the availability of savings in the economy. Savings are derived basically from households, although firms and governments supply savings, household savings. Current household savings is the difference between current income and current consumption expenditures. Individuals prefer current consumption over future consumption, and payment of interest is a reward for waiting. Higher interest rates encourage the substitution of current saving for current consumption. Business and government savings. Most business firms hold savings in the form of retained earnings, the amount of which is determined principally by business profits and to a lesser extent by interest rates. Income flows in the economy and the pacing of government spending programs are the dominant factors affecting government savings. Therefore, saving is basically supplied by the households and is directly related to the interest rate. High interest rate leads to high saving and lower interest rate leads to low shipping. Supply curve of capital is sloping upward from left to right. Mathematically, supply function for investment, if assumed to be linear, can be written as SR is equal to A plus BR, where SR refers to the supply of investment and R is the rate of interest. If we assume SR is equal to minus 20 plus 8R, we can derive a supply schedule for investment like this. And when this supply schedule for investment is represented graphically, we are getting a supply curve for investment which slopes upward from left to right, indicating more supply of capital will be there in the economy when rate of interest increases and vice versa. Demand for capital. Capital is demanded because it is productive. It has the power to yield an income even after covering its cost. While deciding about an investment, the entrepreneur compares the marginal efficiency of capital with the cost of capital funds, that is the prevailing market rate of interest. The entrepreneur goes on investing till marginal efficiency of capital is greater than equal to rate of interest. The marginal efficiency of capital is subject to the operation of law of diminishing returns and its schedule slopes downward from left to right. This is explained in this graph. This graph depicts an entrepreneur have 5 projects before him. 5 projects they give or they have different marginal efficiency of capital. Project A has 15%, project B 12%, project C 10%, project D 8%, project E 6%. Which project the entrepreneur will accept for implementation? That depends on what is the market rate of interest. If the market rate of interest is 10%, then as it appears, project A and project B is acceptable because they provide more profit. Project D and project E is unacceptable because they are unprofitable. Their return is less than the cost. But project C, the entrepreneur will be indifferent and he will consider other factors before taking any decision to implement this project. When the interest rate falls to bring equality with the rate of interest, the marginal efficiency of capital needs to fall, and this is possible with increased use of capital. Similarly, when interest rate rises to bring equality with the rate of interest, marginal efficiency of capital needs to rise, and this is possible when less capital is used. Therefore, investment demand is regarded as the inverse function of the rate of interest. Mathematically, if we assume a linear demand function for investment, we can have the investment function as IR is equal to C minus DR, where IR refers to demand for investment and R refers to the rate of investment. If we specifically take IR is equal to 100 minus 4R, then this function is represented in a tabular form like this and graphically in this graph. This curve shows the demand function for investment, indicating the demand for capital will decrease if the rate of interest will increase, or when a rate of interest decreases, the demand for capital increases in the economy. Equilibrium rate of interest. Equilibrium rate of interest is determined at the point where both supply of saving and demand for investment intersect each other. In this diagram, this curve shows the supply curve for investment and this is the demand curve for investment. Both the curves they intersect at point E, where the rate of interest at equilibrium level is 10%. This equilibrium level of interest is also called the natural rate of interest. So any deviation from this equilibrium rate of interest, the market will operate and the equilibrium level of interest will automatically restore. Assume the market rate of interest is higher than the equilibrium rate of interest, say it is 15%. So at 15% rate of interest, the demand for capital will be less and supply of capital will be more. As a result, there is surplus of capital in the market. As a result, the rate of interest will fall till the equilibrium level rate of interest is achieved. Alternatively, if the market rate of interest is less than the equilibrium rate of interest, say it is 5%, where the supply of savings is less and the demand for capital will be more, and there is a shortage of capital in the market. With the shortage of capital, the interest rate is pushed up and an increase in the rate of interest will continue till the shortage in the market is equal to 0 and the equilibrium rate of interest of 10% is achieved in the market. What are the criticisms of the classical theory of interest? The first criticism is that income is not constant but variable. The theory assumes that saving and investment are brought in equilibrium through the rate of interest, but in actual practice, it is not true that rate of interest is determined by the saving and investment, but it is the level of income which brings equilibrium between saving and investment. The second criticism is based on the fact that saving investment schedules are not independent. Saving and investment schedules have been assumed to be independent in the classical theory of interest, but Keynes viewed that the two curves are not independent from each other. An intervention shifts the investment curve upward, resulting increase in income, and this will lead to higher savings and thus shifts the supply curve too. Similarly, a shift in the supply curve also brings a change in the demand curve. The third criticism, it neglects the effect of investment on income. The classical theory neglects the effect of investment on level of income. A rise in the rate of interest will bring a decline in investment by making it less profitable. This will mean decline in output, employment and income. Decrease in income leads to reduced savings, a fact contrary to the classical assertion that saving is a direct function of the rate of interest. Modern economists they criticize the classical theory of interest as the indeterminate theory. Since savings depend upon the level of income, it is not possible to know rate of interest unless income level is known beforehand, and income level itself cannot be known without already knowing rate of interest. This is all circular reasoning and offers no solution to the problem of interest, and thus the classical theory of interest is indeterminate in nature. The fifth criticism leveled against the classical theory is that it neglects other sources of savings. Savings do not depend on current income alone. Considering the supply of capital to be interest elastic, people might lend their past savings with a rise in the rate of interest, and so there is an increase in the supply of capital. Similarly, banks lend more during the period of slow business activity. It is also argued that classical theory takes unrealistic assumptions of full employment. Basing on the assumption of full employment, classical economists argued that in a fully employed economy, interest as a reward for saving, waiting, or abstinence is necessary to induce people to save. But according to Keynes, underemployment and not the full employment is the rule, and where resources are unemployed, interest is not essentially an inducement to in savings. The seventh criticism that it neglects monetary factors. The classical takes into consideration real factors like time preference and marginal productivity of capital, and thereby neglecting influence of monetary factors on determination of the rate of interest. The classical economists regarded money as a medium of exchange and failed to consider it as a store of value. Keynes, on the other hand, laid emphasis on explaining the determination of the rate of interest as a monetary phenomenon. The last argument labeled against a classical theory is that there is no automatic equality between equilibrium and market rate of interest. According to classical view, any discrepancy between the market and the equilibrium rate of interest would disappear in the long run. It is only a short-term phenomenon. But Keynes does not regard discrepancy between the equilibrium rate of interest and the market rate of interest as accidental and temporary. According to Keynes, as expansion of bank credit by increasing supply of loanable funds brings about a fall in the market rate of interest below the equilibrium rate and vice versa.